What about melatonin in children now? So they're preschool or even school age, and they're using their screens and that blue light you were talking about earlier. Maybe you're referring more to street light coming in the sort of infant toddler. But now they've got their own iPhone at 5 years, 6 years old. I mean, what are your recommendations to cut that off? Because this is just another important sleep disruptor.
Yes. So we talk about melatonin, the hormone of darkness, and melatonin is produced by our brains. The pineal gland, it's a very small structure in the middle of the brain, the suprachiasmatic nucleus. So what that really does is it cues the brain to know, or the individual to know, when it's time for sleep. It kind of induces the sense of sleepiness. It is not sleep medication, but it does induce that feeling of sleepiness, and it helps with regulating the sleep-wake cycle. Now, exogenous melatonin is sort of more of the supplements and things like that. But there are certain things that can suppress melatonin production at the right time, and that one of those things is blue light. And so when we have a child who's bathing in blue light, i.e. with their phones or devices in front of them, that is going to, because what the brain doesn't understand is whether this is natural light or artificial light. I wish it did. And all it sees is light. And so it sees light. So whether it's 11 p.m. and you're on your phone, it interprets that as daytime, and that suppresses melatonin. One thing I would say for children too is they have a very transparent cornea. So their absorption of blue light is higher. So blue light exposure or screen exposure is more deleterious in young children, and it impacts them for longer, actually. So a child that's using a phone up to the point where they fall asleep is more likely to have disrupted sleep than an adult, again, because of that transparency. And then I think another way by which screen, since we're on it, can impact sleep is the content. Now they're watching something that's graphic and all of that. They're now activated mentally. And so that will make it hard for them to sleep.
Okay, so this is a tough question, but do you have an ideal screen time for different age groups?
I mean, I will side with the American Academy of Pediatrics. Less than 2 years old, you really want to avoid any, screen time exposure. I mean, if they're doing FaceTime with a loved one at a distance, because we really want to foster connection. And then, between that school age, you really, again, usually we talk about limiting it to less than 2 hours a day. And then the content, I think, is very important as well. And then usually by about an hour before bed, again, to give their brains to wind down, to start to stay away from screen use. And I think more importantly, as parents, we need to be role models, because sometimes we tell them to get off the screen binging.
We talk about that on this show all the time as it relates to, food and exercise. And, you got to, walk the walk, otherwise they pick up on it and they role model you. And any advice on, some of the other sort of becoming more popular scenarios of night terrors and even restless leg syndrome in children?
Yes. So we've talked a lot about more like, the foundation of good sleep, the healthy sleep habits. Now, there are situations when you do all that and your child is still struggling with sleep. And these are things that can impact sleep quality. Sleep apnea is one of them. Restless leg syndrome is absolutely one. Restless leg syndrome is a phenomenon. It's a neurologic condition where children and adults have discomfort in their lower limbs mostly, but sometimes their upper limbs, and they have difficulties and they have the urge to keep moving their legs or their arms. And every time that happens, it's going to disrupt sleep. It's going to increase their sleep latency, meaning that it makes it harder for them to fall asleep. And sometimes may contribute to difficulties staying asleep. It's been associated, there's some genetic factors to it. It's also associated with low ferritin. So when I see these children, sometimes we'll get a ferritin. So we do almost like a nutritional evaluation. Ferritin, magnesium.
And that's iron storage over time, right?
Exactly, iron storage over time. So that gives you an idea of what their brain iron looks like. And so checking that, if that is low, usually this is
Which
great.
carries oxygen? I mean, without the iron, you can't carry the oxygen.
Exactly. So really supplementing it is one of the keys. In some situations, you might need medication, but when you think of a child, long term, I would rather go the natural routes than having to give them medicines for that.
Look at root cause.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've heard you talk about this before as well. Second to maybe the iron check, the ferritin. Tryptophan, I believe, or even 5-hydroxytryptophan, some of the B complexes, and some of these children, magnesium. What's the best one before bed?
Before bed?
Yeah.
Magnesium?
Yeah. No, but is glycinate, bisglycinate, those citrate, or does it?
I mean, you know,
it's whatever a kid will take.
yeah,
Exactly.
but in terms of absorbability, you know, the chelated ones like magnesium citrate have shown to be much, you know, more bioavailable. So, and I think magnesium is the only nutrient that actually has the research and studies showing it helps keep asleep, not necessarily put you to sleep, but stay asleep. Yeah.
And balancing it with calcium. Again, all these things help to, you know, create the neural synaptic connections you're talking about. Obviously, so does salt. I mean, sodium, chloride, all the electrolytes, magnesium, calcium, in order for these synapses to work in the brain and for good connections to occur. So I think those are some excellent places to start. And then any advice on the night terrors?
Yes, yes. Oh my goodness, that tends to be very disruptive for many families. I think one thing to be aware with night terrors is understand that even though your child may look distressed, which is where typically it occurs the first third of the night, the child might seem to wake up or sit upright and really look like they're seeing something very scary. They might start to scream. They may start to sweat profusely. You know, sometimes they get out of bed and run, in which case we call it sleepwalking plus sleep terror.
I had it. I did not terrors, walking, sleeping.
Well, okay. So I think the first thing is making sure there's safety. So if you have a child that's going to run, you really want to make sure there are no sharp objects. They're not going to fall off the stairs or things like that. If it happens, you want to comfort the child, but not try to wake them up. Because waking them up might actually make the episode longer. It's going to make things seem more confusing. One of the strategies we always will say, again, those healthy sleep habits, if you have a child taking caffeine, if you have a child who's sleep deprived, all those things will affect your child's ability to propel or make those symptoms worse. And then in some situations, especially if it's very predictive, again, within the first third of the night, and you know your child at 11 p.m. like clockwork will wake up screaming, you could do what we call preemptive awakening. So about 15 to 30 minutes before then, you just gently wake them up so that you're almost, it's like you're bypassing that sleep stage.
Interesting.
So that you don't trigger it. But I will go with sleep extension first. Many children are sleep deprived. So even adding 15, 30 minutes of extra sleep sometimes will make things better.
Start there.